Leaked film straight out of Halas Hall is sending massive shockwaves through NFL tape rooms, and what happened in this single practice rep should terrify every tackle in the NFC North. Austin Booker, a fifth-round longshot who was supposed to be a developmental project, didn't just win a one-on-one drill against a proven starter. He completely annihilated him with a speed-to-power move that collapsed the pocket in under 2 seconds. Onlookers froze on the field as the young edge rusher struck the blocker's chest with terrifying force, driving an established veteran backward like a ragdoll. Bears coaches immediately rewound the raw footage in complete disbelief, while an explosive sideline altercation broke out between units. The brutal tape doesn't lie, and it reveals a terrifying structural shift in Chicago's defense that nobody saw coming. Here is the exact frame-by-frame breakdown of the violent rep that just proved Austin Booker is transforming from a draft sleeper into an absolute NFC nightmare. August in Lake Forest usually carries a predictable rhythm. The August heat hangs thick over the manicured grass of Halas Hall, where execution is carefully measured, scripts are strictly adhered to, and veteran hierarchy is quietly protected. Practice reps during training camp are meant to build cohesion, to tune the engine of an offense that carries massive citywide expectations, and to allow starting units to find their baseline rhythm before the real games begin. But when the whistle blew for a standard late-morning 5-on-5 pass protection segment, that carefully constructed order evaporated in less than 2 seconds. It wasn't a high-profile primetime matchup or a stadium field scrimmage. It was an isolated iron-on-iron drill tucked away on the far field, where line play is stripped down to its most ruthless, primitive elements. No scheme, no help over the top, no chipping running backs, just pure physical leverage, reaction time, and violence. Austin Booker lined up in a wide 9 technique, uncoiling his massive frame into an aggressive, low-slung stance that immediately drew the attention of the film crew positioned atop the end zone tower. Opposite him sat an established multi-million-dollar offensive tackle, a player whose hands are renowned across the league for their anchor ability and anchor and drag mechanics. At the snap, the contrast in movement was staggering. Booker didn't just explode off the ball. He launched himself like a sprinter off the blocks, instantly closing the distance with a terrifying burst of raw vertical speed. The tackle dropped into his vertical set, expecting the young rusher to take the high side and try to bend the edge, as he often did in college. That split-second assumption proved fatal. Instead of opening his hips to turn the corner, Booker planted his outside foot with violent force into the turf, instantly converting every ounce of his linear momentum directly into horizontal power. He lowered his center of gravity, coiled his upper body, and fired his 33-inch arms directly into the chest plate of the veteran tackle before the blocker's hands could even cross his own frame. The audio captured on the ambient directional mics was sickening, a sharp, metallic crack of shoulder pads colliding, followed by a desperate gasp of displaced air. The tackle's feet left the ground entirely for a fraction of a second, his base utterly destroyed as his cleats dragged helplessly across the grass. Booker didn't just win the angle, he walked a pro-caliber offensive lineman 8 yards straight back into the exact spot where the starting quarterback was set to drop his back foot. The play collapsed instantly, but the momentum didn't end with the whistle. As the quarterback scrambled out of the pocket to avoid the collapsing mass, the veteran tackle hit the turf, completely unseated and visibly shaken by the sheer violence of the impact. The defensive sideline erupted into an absolute frenzy. Reserves and defensive line stalwarts swarmed the field, roaring in validation as Booker calmly unbuckled his chin strap, walking back to the line with an eerie cold detachment that only heightened the intensity of the moment. The offensive unit, feeling utterly humiliated by the raw disrespect of the play, surged forward to confront the young defensive end. Off-camera coaches rushed to separate the clashing bodies as shouting matches echoed across the facility, forcing the staff to pause the period altogether. High above the field, behind the tinted glass of the executive suites and inside the video department's editing bays, the room went dead silent. Analysts and scout team personnel immediately queued up the raw digital feed, hitting the reverse button to rewatch the sequence from 3 distinct angles. They zoomed in on Booker's first 3 steps, analyzing the terrifying efficiency of his hip extension and the absolute absence of wasted motion. What was supposed to be a late-round flyer on an unpolished athlete from Kansas suddenly looked like an absolute administrative failure by every scout who let him slide into the 5th round. The tape was undeniable, uncensored, and utterly terrifying. Word traveled instantly through the building before the players even made it to the cold tubs. Austin Booker was no longer playing like a rookie trying to make the roster. He was actively dismantling the highest paid block of the Chicago Bears offensive line. When mechanical scouts zoom into the frame-by-frame breakdown of that viral Halas Hall rep, the illusion of Austin Booker's triumph as a mere accident of momentum completely vanishes. What remains is an absolute masterclass in biomechanical efficiency, representing a radical evolution in how the edge rusher manipulates center of gravity, leverage angles, and kinetic sequencing. Coming out of Kansas, the consensus draft evaluation on Booker was unanimous, an exceptionally fluid athlete with a basketball player's frame who possessed undeniable spatial awareness, but whose play leverage suffered from a fundamentally tall, upright posture. At nearly 6'5" and 240 pounds, his collegiate film frequently showed him standing up at the snap, exposing his chest to power-punching tackles and relying purely on late-developing finesse moves to win the high side. The pro-ready tackles in the NFL routinely chew up those high-hipped rushers, rendering their length useless by getting under their pads before they can bend the arc. However, the tape from camp proves that Chicago's coaching staff made a fundamental adjustment to Booker's stance mechanics, triggering a terrifying conversion in his play style. In this specific rep, Booker's pre-snap alignment reflects a dramatically altered kinetic baseline. Instead of his former, slightly elevated 4-point setup, he sits deeper in his hips, sinking his hamstrings to compress his knee bend by several crucial degrees. His weight distribution shifts heavily onto the balls of his feet, loading his back leg like a coil spring. By bringing his thoracic spine lower to the ground, he effectively drops his baseline functional height from 6'5" down to below 6 feet at the exact moment of initial movement. This altered center of gravity completely flips the leverage dynamic that NFL offensive tackles rely on during vertical sets. The snap anticipation captured on the high-angle camera shows a get-off that is surgically violent. The instant the ball twitches in the center's hand, Booker's back foot drives violently into the grass with 0 false steps or wasted motion. His first step covers nearly 4 feet of turf, landing with perfect cleat plant at an aggressive 45-degree forward pitch. Because he maintains his lowered posture through step 2 and step 3, his chest remains fully hidden from the tackle's sightline. The tackle drops into a wide, balance-oriented set, expecting to set a pocket perimeter, but Booker's low angle forces the defender into a state of structural panic. The offensive lineman is forced to bend deeper than his standard comfort zone, exposing his waist and softening his functional anchor before contact is even initiated. Then comes the true technical highlight of the rep, the leverage strike using his elite 33-inch long reach. Standard speed-to-power conversions require the pass rusher to strike the blocker's sternum at the exact apex of their acceleration vector. Because Booker has mastered maintaining his low track, he delivers his two-handed bull stab with his arms fully extended long before the tackle can bring his own hands inside to clamp down. His palms land flush under the collarbones of the blocker, exploiting the 33-inch reach advantage to establish total control over the tackle's upper torso. The physics are brutally simple. By striking upwards from a lower leverage point while operating at peak velocity, Booker's extended force completely neutralizes the tackle's 200-plus pounds of lower body anchoring strength. Film analysts replaying the contact phase point out the exact frame where kinetic energy transfers. Booker locks his elbows out instantly upon impact, absorbing none of the backward force into his own shoulders. His lower body continues to churn with short, choppy power steps, driving his cleats deep into the turf to push the blocker's momentum straight back into the passing pocket. The tackle's hands fly outward in a desperate attempt to catch Booker's shoulder pads, but Booker's length creates a physical buffer zone that keeps his own chest entirely clean. It is an elite synthesis of leverage, reach, and unadulterated force. What the draft community labeled as a raw developmental project had, through sheer mechanical refinement, unlocked a power move capable of destroying an all-pro protection scheme. The immediate aftermath of Booker's dominant rep ignited a powder keg that had been smoldering all morning between Chicago's starting offense and defense. The sheer violence of the play broke the unwritten rules of August football, where contact is meant to be controlled to protect high-priced assets. When the offensive tackle picked himself up off the turf, his helmet askew and his chest plate pushed up into his neck, the entire offensive line unit surged forward. Off-camera shouting escalated into shoving matches, with veteran guard play stepping in to shield their humbled teammate, while defensive linemen circled like sharks sensing blood in the water. Face masks clutched at shoulder pads, coaches scrambled to wedge themselves between towering athletes, and whistles blew continuously in a desperate attempt to regain control of Halas Hall. Booker stood at the eye of the storm, completely unbothered, adjusting his gloves with a cold demeanor that only infuriated the offensive unit further. The conflict quickly spread beyond the trenches during the subsequent 9-on-7 inside run period. Fueled by the disrespect of the pass protection rep, the defense played with a ravenous, aggressive edge, blowing up backfield tracking before running backs could even reach the line of scrimmage. Booker set a brutal edge on 3 consecutive snaps, slamming tight ends into the dirt and collapsing run lanes before play-action concepts could even develop. The offense, feeling their execution completely suffocated, snapped back with fiery exchanges on the sideline. Words were traded between unit leaders, calling into question the physical toughness of the offensive line, while defensive coaches struggled to suppress quiet smiles at the sheer brutality their pass rusher was dictating. The practice intensity escalated from standard training camp repetition to something resembling a hyper-competitive regular season division rivalry game. Head coach Ben Johnson didn't step in to extinguish the fiery atmosphere. Instead, he leaned into the raw tension. Gathering the team at midfield after the fiery session, Johnson didn't issue a typical scolding about practice safety or discipline. He singled out the physical standard set by the young edge rusher, openly praising Booker's relentless intensity and speed-to-power translation in front of the entire roster. Johnson addressed the offensive line directly, challenging them to match Booker's violent edge rather than complaining about the force of the contact. The message echoed loud and clear across the facility. Tenure and contracts meant nothing if you couldn't anchor against raw violence. Booker hadn't just disrupted a practice rep. He had single-handedly set a new, merciless standard of physicality for the entire Chicago Bears roster heading into the season. The explosive wake of Austin Booker's practice field dominance rapidly spread far beyond a single highlight reel, fundamentally destabilizing the structural hierarchy of Chicago's offense and reshaping the entire trajectory of the summer. What was initially plotted as a calculated, methodical competition for the starting left tackle job suddenly turned into a high-stakes survival trial dictated almost entirely by the relentless violence of Booker's edge rushes. Going into camp, the coaching staff had envisioned a controlled rotation between the incumbent veteran and a promising young pass blocker, a series of rep-counting measures designed to give both players a fair runway to earn the coveted blindside protection role. But Booker completely blew up that careful balance. Lining up primarily as an outside track rusher on the defense's right side, Booker was paired in direct, single-coverage snaps against whoever took the top-tier snaps at left tackle. Rather than providing a baseline test of technique, Booker's hyper-aggressive get-off turned every standard team period into an agonizing daily stress test that exposed every microscopic flaw in the tackle's footwork, hand placement, and core balance. Tackles who were accustomed to setting wide and trusting their athletic reach to push speed rushers past the pocket found themselves constantly outmaneuvered and physically overwhelmed. If a tackle overset to counter Booker's blistering track speed, the second-year edge defender punished them instantly by planting his outside foot, sinking his hips, and exploding inward with a razor-sharp inside counter that disrupted the pocket before the quarterback could hit his third step. If the tackle overcorrected by sitting heavy on the inside post to guard against the counter, Booker unleashed the same brutal, long-arm speed-to-power drive that had shocked Halas Hall during that fateful 5-on-5 session. The daily film sessions in the offensive meeting rooms became increasingly uncomfortable. Play after play, offensive line coaches rewound footage showing pocket collapses, holding penalties born of sheer desperation, and forced scrambles, all directly caused by the unyielding pressure coming off Booker's side. The ongoing battle for the left tackle spot ceased to be an academic exercise in scheme execution. It became a grueling fight to find any blocker capable of simply holding their ground against a defender who was playing with an almost frightening level of physical superiority. While the offensive coaching staff scrambled to adjust their protection schemes and protect their tackles' confidence, a massive cultural shift was taking root inside the defensive team room. In an environment as hyper-competitive and instinctual as an NFL locker room, players instinctively know who dictates the tone on the field long before the official depth charts are finalized. For over a year, the defensive identity had pivoted almost exclusively around Montez Sweat, whose imposing presence and established star power anchored the pass rush. But as the dog days of August dragged on, it became glaringly obvious to veterans and rookies alike that Booker had stepped into a complementary and at times dominant alpha role on the edge opposite Sweat. He was no longer treated as a sub-package specialist or a high upside rotational piece whose snaps needed to be managed. Defensive leaders began openly coalescing around Booker's fierce demeanor, leaning into the razor-sharp intensity he brought to every single rep, whether it was a full contact team session or a walkthrough. This shift in standing was visible in the small, subtle details of camp life. When the defense gathered in pre-snap huddles or lined up during game simulation periods, veteran linebackers and secondary leaders routinely directed their pre-snap calls toward Booker, trusting his eyes and leverage to collapse the front side of any given play. Opposing offenses could no longer afford to slant their slide protections entirely toward Sweat, because doing so left their left tackle isolated on an island against the emerging monster who was actively seeking contact. The locker room dynamic transformed from one of hopeful expectation to one of genuine belief. Teammates openly spoke in film sessions about the terrifying versatility the front four now possessed. Sweat's relentless long arm power on one side, combined with Booker's explosive long-limbed speed to power on the other, gave Chicago a twin-engine edge rush capability that had been sorely missing from the franchise for years. Booker hadn't just won a position battle or disrupted a few practice sessions. He had completely rearranged the power structure of the defense, establishing himself as a foundational disruptor whom no offensive coordinator in the league could afford to ignore. The tape circulating out of Halas Hall did not merely capture a single highlight reel victory. It provided undeniable proof of an irreversible evolution. What draft experts once dismissed as a raw, late-round project, a fifth-round lottery ticket selected out of Kansas with only 500 collegiate snaps to his name, has transformed into the most dangerous physical variable in the NFC North. The pre-draft consensus had insisted that Austin Booker's lean frame, lack of refined strength, and upright pad level would require years of patient developmental coaching before he could survive the punishing trenches of professional football. But tape doesn't lie, and cold mechanics do not care about draft slots or analyst projections. The frame-by-frame evidence from training camp proves that Booker has successfully bridged the gap between raw, fluid athleticism and elite NFL power. By synchronizing his massive 33-inch reach with a lower, compressed center of gravity and explosive ground-up leg drive, he has unlocked a speed-to-power weapon that exposes the fundamental flaws of modern pass protection. The ripple effects of this transformation reach far beyond the confines of Chicago's practice facilities. Across the league, divisional rivals and rival pro personnel departments are already scrambling to adjust their scouting reports. Opposing offensive line coaches watching the film are forced to reckon with the terrifying reality. The Chicago Bears front four is no longer an asymmetrical threat that can be contained by simply sliding protection toward Montez Sweat. In Booker, the defense has unlocked a secondary hyper-violent edge engine capable of winning one-on-one matchups on demand. His ability to convert linear speed into violent, chest-jarring contact keeps veteran offensive tackles perpetually off balance, turning standard pass sets into anxious guessing games. The long arm stab, the lightning-fast inside counter, and the raw power to walk 240-pound tackles straight back into the quarterback's lap give Chicago a pass rush identity rooted in unyielding disruption. Ultimately, Booker's dramatic rise is a testament to what happens when supreme physical gifts meet elite mechanical refinement. He is no longer a sleeper waiting in the wings or a sub-package specialist brought in strictly for third and long scenarios. He has established himself as a dominant, game-altering defensive star whose presence alters every offensive game plan he faces. The rest of the league may have let 31 teams pass on him 4 separate times, but the tape from Lake Forest has delivered a resounding warning to every offensive coordinator on Chicago's schedule. Austin Booker hasn't just arrived in the NFL, he has arrived as a certified game-disrupting NFC nightmare, and the violent rep at Halas Hall was merely the opening scene of a long, terrifying reign.